Okay, how are you, Shane? Welcome to Ancestral Medicine for Modern Times.
Oh, I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. This is a
Uh,
beautiful morning here in Ecuador, South America. How is your day there back home?
I just woke up. I'm in Wisconsin, in the United States, and I haven't even looked outside. I think it's a little bit cold, but other than that, it's going to be a decent day. I'm just quarantined and just spending a lot of time in front of a computer.
And have you been doing a lot of work through the computer now?
Yeah, I do a lot of these, a lot of different podcasts, and I'm doing a lot of my own podcast. I'm doing a lot of my podcast. Here we are. I'm doing a lot of uh, a lot of special episodes, quarantine related. Getting a lot of scientists on, kind of talking about the pandemic and just kind of trying to explore the pandemic from as many different angles as possible. So it's been very interesting.
Yes, I saw your last episode that
Oh,
you were talking with a specialist in hordes and scarcity.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Scarcity, yeah,
scarcity. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. This is a very interesting time, and everyone has there's a million different things that we're going to have to think about in this new changing world. Um, so it's very interesting, and it's going to be very overwhelming for a lot of people as well. And so I'm trying not to get too overwhelmed myself, and just trying to do. I like feeling. I've been feeling very busy and motivated and creative, and so I'm just trying to kind of ride that wave of creativity as much as I can, and then hopefully I don't crash anytime too soon.
I how is everything there now in Wisconsin? How people is taking this now pandemic virus?
I don't know. I haven't been outside.
I understand. Yeah,
I, I don't really watch the news or anything.
uh-huh.
How about you?
Yeah, me either. I don't watch news, but you receive from friends WhatsApp messages and videos, and the things are the health care system is collapsed now.
The
It is
healthcare system is completely collapsed there.
it's completely collapsed. Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's very difficult times. There's people where is they're not receiving attention in
yeah,
hospitals. So like it's
yeah,
very difficult.
yeah. I think it's only going to get worse. Actually, I'm uh, I'm pretty worried for humanity right now.
Yes, yeah, me either. That's why I'm also creating this podcast
Hmm.
to help people in a way to find another alternative way of thinking or changing the view. No, that's how I found you. I found you through your movie, your last movie I saw.
Psychonautics.
Psychonaut is a comic inspiration for psychedelics, and I
Yeah.
love it. As I love everything. I myself I have 16 years working with ayahuasca, especially.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I'm a medical doctor and a shaman also. So I over do my research and look what is happening, and I found you there, so I'm very interested about your point of view now with this as a westerner and as a comedian, and how this the I have seen what you have shown very clearly how psychedelics have changed your life, encourage you and empower you, to bring the medicine of happiness, of joy, to people, to your life and to the people, so I want if you can share more about these insights.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my psychedelic history, I started doing psychedelics when I was about 16 years old. At the time, I was just kind of a young, rebellious kid trying to get into as much trouble as possible. and I'm really really grateful that you know, the first kind of drug that I did out of rebellion was marijuana, which for a few years was a really positive change in my life, and then just kind of eventually stopped working for me. But shortly shortly after marijuana, I found mushrooms, and mushrooms were something that um, so completely changed my life in every way, and just really made me a much more mindful and creative person, and thoughtful, and really curious about how the brain works. And I so mushrooms have kind of been my go-to for years. And then I dabbled in, you know, I do acid or MDMA here and there, but mushrooms were like my main thing. And often a lot of like larger doses kind of by myself, and just using it as time for reflection and a creative catalyst. And then you know, 9 years ago or so, someone gave me DMT for the first time. And after I did DMT for the first time, which I don't necessarily think is any it's DMT is one that I don't think is for everybody. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely more yeah, you know, where mushrooms I'd feel a little more comfortable that in the right set and setting, I think that they could be a pretty useful tool for most people. There's going to be some conditions out there and stuff that people might want to research if they have medical issue, or if they have mental health histories already, of course. But you know, I wish more people would try mushrooms. However, DMT is less of a kind of a therapeutic or thing, and more of like a uh, exploratory thing. So if you're interested in having the most fascinating, interesting 10 minutes of your life, DMT is good for you. But if, or I mean, it might be a good fit for you. But if you're worried about reality feeling a little slippery and being overwhelmed in that way, uh, DMT is maybe something that people should avoid. So I don't really I don't know, but for me, it got me thinking about how the mind works in reality in a very different way, and it got me much more interested in neuroscience. And and it was the catalyst to really, before DMT, I always assumed that I would eventually have like a comedy special about psychedelics, just because they were near and dear to me. But after DMT, I was pretty obsessed with, and I started putting myself out there and getting out of the closet a little bit, and telling as many people as I could about psychedelics.
And can you tell us now that you're, because you're, when you talk about DMT, for example, I don't know nothing about DMT in a, like in a synthetic way. You know, I am more a plant person, so
Yeah.
I have been 16 years taking ayahuasca, for example. I work with ayahuasca, and I work also with raw ayahuasca. There is the most of the people that they in the take in the western outside from jungle, they take the cook one, but there
Mm.
is a raw ayahuasca that is not
Oh,
cooked, and this one doesn't give you, for example, vomits. This doesn't give you convulsion with your body. This one,
interesting.
it is very soft with the body. You have a deep the journey, but without the bothering in your body.
Oh wow. Well,
So this
I
is
want to
unique.
try I want to try the raw the raw
you,
kind.
you are invited to my home if you want to come to to test it, to try it, you are invited.
Well,
As soon this
I
coronavirus is gone, I believe this year is going to be crazy.
yeah.
But as soon now on live, I tell you that you're invited if you want to know this.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I'll take you up on that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because nobody, even you have talked with maps, and you have talked with, you're doing this research. Nobody have talked to you the raw medicine.
No,
It's the
nobody.
first time in your life.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
happy to be the first one to share you. And there's only few people in the world that have this, and
Int-
no more than 5 people.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm one of those.
That's amazing. Well,
Yeah.
I'll get a plane ticket as soon as I can. You
Yeah.
know, I have for people that watch my documentary, you know, I had some mental health issues due to overuse of psychedelics and not enough time integrating. And
Uh-huh.
ayahuasca was a little bit of a catalyst in some of it. And it's the way it's portrayed, because you know I didn't edit the documentary, but the way that we had to frame things, it was like, you know, ayahuasca was I was the reality was I was starting to go a little manic, and then I had an ayahuasca ceremony that made me very manic, but then I also did mushrooms sometime after that as well, that didn't help things. And but the way that it's framed in the movie, it does make it seem like it was like ayahuasca alone that kind of caused this to happen, and that wasn't the case. But
Uh-huh.
I've been you know, I'm no longer terribly worried about um, you know, learning more about my manic episodes and what they feel like when they're coming on. I feel like I have a better sense of where I'm at and when I'm uh, safer to explore. And ayahuasca's been one of those things that I've been wanting to try again, as crazy as it might seem. But I also I kind of I didn't really follow all of my instructions, and I didn't follow the dieta closely enough. I didn't focus on integration as much as I should, and so there's just a lot of things that I did wrong that I was a little cavalier with, and so I would it, it was, you know, it was a good lesson for me to take the experience and um, much more seriously. I'm a comedian. I have a hard time taking things seriously, but
Really.
um, but yeah, there's but I would absolutely love to do raw ayahuasca. That sounds fantastic.
Yeah, you will love it. This is it's amazing what you were saying because I saw when I saw your documentary, once that really wants me to talk with you is to share what you just said now. It's like ayahuasca was not, o sea, ayahuasca was that helps you to stop having a disorder using psychedelics.
Mm-hmm.
That is for me the great teaching that the yahe, we say yahe, no, because we talk to the, so we, I say we, you know, in the tradition what I have learned, we see, we connect through a spirit, so not through a molecule, no. So DMT is the molecule, but it's not DMT. So you face a intelligence
Mm-hmm.
that that is more intelligence than you, than me, than everyone, no, here, and knows, has the, has in a way that we don't know yet, but has the memory of everything that has passed, that
Mm-hmm.
has occurred in your past and before you were being here, and what's happening to you, no. So it brings you, have this power to bring to you what's going on in your life in front of you, bah, directly, and you cannot escape. So you cannot like get out from there, and it's like one journey forward.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what make it difficult because the ego gets very hit, and so that's another problem that is happening, for example, with the, in order to have a good experience with ayahuasca, is that it's not to have the roller coaster dosage. So you have to train yourself and your mind to get used to different layers of yourself and to feel comfortable with these different layers. So when you get in the moment of disarm or in the moment of more your mind wants to become crazy, you can feel comfortable and say, it's my mind going crazy, and it's not a
Mm-hmm.
problem. Everything's going to go back, because the fear is that you're going to lost into this space, no?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I have experienced, no, when in my work with people, no, and in myself also, the fear of not going be able to go back to what I know already,
Mm.
how I behave, how I think, how I move. So the idea everything is new,
Mm.
and how I'm going to mind is say how I'm going to operate in this unknown. So for example, in your creativity now, in your shows as a comedian, this flexibility of discovering these more aspects or more layers of yourself,
Yeah.
uh, how this has increased your connection with your people, that with your tribe, that people that follows you, and to make them to be more funny, or to talk about the shadow of people, no?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's been a interesting journey in terms of communicating these things with the public, because I had so I've been a comedian for 16 years, and early on in my career, and even like my first album and everything, but I always had like a couple silly jokes about psychedelics here and there. I liked talking about them as much as possible, but I found just the way that the stigma around psychedelics was, I had I had a difficult time saying anything too serious about them. And usually the kind of jokes that work are like, "Hey, I took this mind-altering substance and I had this weird thought of like being in a different place than I was, and that's when I did something stupid." Like that's like kind of the humor that people are used to attaching to with substances, because people are used to hearing jokes about alcohol, you know,
Uh-huh,
and
uh-huh,
alcohol's, so every drinking joke is like, I drank too much and I did this stupid thing. And so unfortunately people have that association with all kind of mind altering substances, because alcohol's usually the only mind altering substance that really most anyone's had much of any experience with, other than like coffee or sugar, if you're counting some of those lighter psychoactives. But um but as I kind of got more interested in kind of talking about exploring these experiences more in depth, I just was having a difficult time figuring out how to do that, because a regular comedy club audience was not filled with like it's not filled with the people to see Shane Mauss. Although some of my fans are there, it's just like people are like, "Hey, a comedy club, that sounds interesting. Oh, okay, this person's been on Comedy Central and Conan O'Brien. Okay, they must be funny." And then that's what they don't know what to expect or anything else. They don't know who you are. They don't know your sense of humor. And so I found that if I did more than like 5 to maybe 10 minutes of jokes about psychedelics, people would start like getting, like a lot of very strange looks and everything. Like, oh man, is this guy just some druggie or something? And
uh-huh.
which I guess I am. But but what happened was, um I just started building. I had all of this material and I had I could not figure out how to express it. And then, things like podcasting started becoming more and more popular. And some of my experiences, some of my friends would have me on a podcast because they were they were really interested in hearing my take, because they'd heard me talk about them off the air. And so I started for the first time kind of talking in depth about my experiences on podcasts. And that's when all of the sudden, like I was never anticipating this to happen, but like people started becoming like starting to know me as like some psychedelic explorer or whatever. It was never my intention. I'm much more of of a science guy. I have this science podcast, and that's what I'm most passionate about. But when that happened, that allowed me the chance to find smaller venues and start marketing specifically to the psychedelic crowd. And at the time, my psychedelic experience was very personal and a lot of solo journeys. And so I wasn't involved with any of the psychedelic communities. I wasn't involved with now I talk with people with maps and stuff like that, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic
Uh-huh.
Studies, and I work with a bunch of different groups. At the time I didn't even know these groups existed. I had never been to like Burning Man or anything like that. And so I was like unfamiliar, and I had as many stereotypes in my head about what the psychedelic community might be like as anybody. And so, but I found out when I started trying out these shows that these crowds were not like your stereotypical cliche like stoner burnout crowd, although you'll have some of those, and there's nothing wrong with being a stoner. But rather than it being rooms filled with burnouts, it was some of the most intelligent, creative, interesting, mindful people. A lot of people have, very good jobs, do a lot of like really great things for the planet, are really mindful about the planet and humanity and themselves and consciousness. And it just changed I was like, oh my God, I want to perform in front of these people for the rest of my career. How can I do that? Because I also don't want to just talk about psychedelics for the rest of my career. As you know, you've been
Yeah.
checking out my podcast. I have a variety of interests,
Yeah.
but I really, the psychedelic community is about the finest group of people that I've ever met, and so it's been really inspiring, and it's been a really beautiful journey ever since for me personally, to get to explore some of my most complicated um, ideas in a way that I don't need to be like funny every second, and I can actually express what my true takes are on some of these things, and to also be able to travel around the United States and go to these small little rural cities, like the red states, the conservative states that no one would ever think of as going to like Toledo, Ohio, or Wichita, or I don't know how familiar, but basically like the south of smaller towns in the south of the United States, and getting to perform this psychedelic show to a bunch of underserved people and that are psychedelic users there,
Mhm.
and giving them an opportunity for entertainment for live entertainment that they never get to see in their town. It's just been incredibly fulfilling for me.
Wow. It's amazing. So your life have changed completely.
It has quite a
It,
bit, and then
yeah.
fortunately, it's kind of helped with my science communication as well, because the psychedelic crowd is really quite typically quite thoughtful, mindful, intelligent people,
Uh-huh.
and a lot of my work is examining the subconscious mind and the difference between our our conscious I talked about this a little bit in the scarcity episode that you watched, but the difference between the story we tell ourselves about why we behave, and then all of these kind of hidden primes and mechanisms going in our head and in our environment. And I find that the psychedelic community kind of gets that concept a lot better, a lot more intuitively than the average person, because they've spent more time having these experiences. And so so it's helped with my science communication quite a bit as well.
But then I have a question. Why it's very good how you describe the scientific people that is doing research in psychedelics. They're very mindful. They're intelligent. They study. They learn. They're mindful. But they have only, like, let's say, from Hoffman, no, 1942, yeah, that the
Hmm.
42 and 1950 was released LSD, no, first poem for the world.
Hmm.
Then why they, being so intelligent, they want to discover, or so, to talk about something that, for example, shamans have been talking for 5,000 years
Hmm.
ago. So why in these studies, great studies they're doing in Job Hopkins or MAPS, are working now with the FDA very passionately, because they say the FDA now, they are like brothers and sisters, and they love each other, and they are working good. The problem is with the A, no, and the question is why they're not working with shamans that they
Oh,
already, o sea,
that's a really, really, really great question, and I'm not sure I'm necessarily the person to answer it, but I'll take a whack at it anyway. Um, I, I I think that science, Western science, because of the structure and the rigor to it, that is a really, really, really powerful tool in many circumstances, and for teasing apart what we do and don't know, and what observations and studies are valid and what aren't. There is there is a little bit um of uh of kind of, what's the word I'm kind of searching, there there's a little bit of, in trying to, um the psychedelic community has had a really, really, really difficult time um doing any studies, because of the way the regulatory system is. It makes psychedelics near impossible to study, and the number of hoops that need to be jumped through to be able to study psychedelics in the United States is, it's harder than studying any other thing out there. And the grants and the approvals and stuff are only being rewarded to the most legitimate of scientific organizations. So although there are places out there that are very interested in talking with shamans and bringing shamans into this, a lot of times there is a kind of um, way in which a lot of these researchers need to present their research, and then there's a you know there's thousands of people out there that would love integrating shamans into this work, but they just simply wouldn't be able to get approval for it, because from uh, from a a Western perspective, if you if you say the way that Western medicine is, especially that it's so rigid and sterile, and you close your eyes and you think about a doctor sterilizing everything, and scientists have these test tubes, and you use these sterile rooms with these sanitized hospital beds, that like everything's controlled, and that's how science is done. And so if you go to try to go to the FDA that has that idea of what science looks like, and then you go like, hey, we're also going to bring in this guy that's like wearing wearing some traditional outfit, and like dancing around and playing an instrument, and this is part of the scientific process. I think that that's something that plenty of psychedelic researchers understand and get, but to be able to get the approval to do studies, the people approving studies, I don't think that they would understand that at all. So I think it's going to be difficult, but I think that there's anthropologists that are able to go and study how things are being done in different cultures, and then people are able to abstract that information into our modern scientific tools. But yeah, I would love to see more of the people that actually have the experience and the practices and the traditions that have been honed through generations to be guiding many of these studies. I think that it's very important and potentially even dangerous if we don't start doing that. It's just a tough sell. I mean, this is America. Why do we write blank checks for every plane, for every bomb and submarine and everything else, but then we bicker over having respirators for people during a spending money on respirators during a pandemic. That's America for you. You know, we just have a an idea of how we do things, and people are rather stubborn, and and we also have our own. You know, we're individualistic, uh, egocentric um, nation um, with some real supremacy bias, and so I think that we also have a hard time, um, reaching out to trying to learn from other cultures.
Yes, I have a friend doing the research now, psychedelics research in New York, and I say to him like, say to your tutors, now to your mentors, why they don't do the research? Because here, when we work with patients, when I work with patients, you have to drink the medicine. So I drink ayahuasca. I'm in the trip of or in the journey
I,
of the
I
ayahuasca.
I'm sorry. Sorry, can I stop you for a second? You just broke up a little bit on me, and
Sorry,
so
I can
no,
repeat.
I'm very interested in what you had to say, and I was just not. You were freezing up a little bit. I think you're okay now. Yeah.
Okay, the I have a friend doing research in New York, no, with psychedelics, and I share with him information about in the shamanistic way, no, but because we're friends, not because we're working together as in the research. And I say to him, say to your mentors that we take the medicine, we take the ayahuasca, and we work with our patient with the effects with the ayahuasca. They are
Mm,
doing the studies. Yeah, they want to understand something, giving a substance to the people, but the medical doctor or the nurse or the now the new career that is happening in university, the new psychedelic assisted therapy, the guy or the woman is doing this, they are not taking the medicine. So
yeah.
they are guiding through just through the mind,
Yeah.
not guiding through the heart. Yeah,
Yeah.
not guiding the journey. So in the shamanistic journey, every time you share the medicine with a person, you enter in the journey with the person, and
Hmm.
you work with fire. You have to light a tobacco. You have to light a candle. You have to put water. Some people ask you water, and in the effects of so you learn to walk in the journey. You
Hmm.
learn to move, you learn to talk, you learn to order your thoughts, and to balance the inner journey and the outside and what is happening outside at the same time. And
Hmm.
this is a skill that really is very it's very powerful to develop, because that is what really makes you a healer. A person that can be in the intellect and at the same time can be connecting with the intuitive. It's like the both brains like really working at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, even take something less intense of an experience, like say say MDMA or ketamine or something like that, which is fairly um, depending on the person can be a fairly, I would say, easy experience compared to something like ayahuasca or even mushrooms. But uh, you even have within the um, ketamine and MDMA assisted psychotherapy therapists that have never even once in their entire life had had the substance that and not only are they not doing it with you there, which something like MDMA, you know first off, is with those substances, it's simply not possible. No therapist could just be doing MDMA all day every day to help guide their patients through the experience. But to have never had a single experience, I mean, I find that just almost
Yeah,
irresponsible. I
it's a
think that.
lie from me cheating.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that um although it's better than nothing for me, from someone that is up for having a new experience, I would prefer that be given to me by someone that already has some experience within that space. And it much like, even if you're just sitting around doing some mushrooms with your friends, the one person who's not tripping there is gonna like kind of kill the vibe a little bit, because it's gonna be hard. You get self-conscious, and they have a hard time relating, and it just gets you too in your head, and then you feel like you can't talk to that person because they're not going to understand what you're talking about. And so I just don't see how you can do effective therapy having never had and this is, again, this is another example of I hope that my hope is that you're not too terribly frustrated with the psychedelic researchers themselves, because they are doing the best they can within the confines that they have. So if you take something like MDMA assisted psychotherapy, well, MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, they absolutely are saying to the FDA, hey, we need this as part of the protocol, that our therapists have the optional ability
Hmm.
to have this experience themselves. And
Hmm.
that's just a really, really difficult pill for the Federal Drug Administration to swallow, because there's not anything else out there like that. You don't Doctors don't need to give themselves chemo before giving chemo to other patients. Doctors don't need to get uh um necessarily like get drunk themselves to help someone in detox. So it
Uh-huh.
runs, because the world of psychedelics in so many ways is so peculiar and so counterintuitive, and because it has so much historical stigma attached to it, and then just so much just pure lack of information. You take the stigma and the lack of information, and you combine that with the current scientific model and Federal Drug Administration model, and it's just going to, I think we're a long ways off before people start kind of changing their minds about what best practices are going to look like in a psychedelic research and psychedelic therapeutic setting.
Yes. Yes, very good answer. Thank you for taking it. I want to ask you something that I was reading from all your work you have done, and I found a stand-up show, you say jokes that can make my parents proud. You know.
Yeah, that was my very first album. Back when I was just more of an absurdist comedian. I did have one psychedelic joke in there, but that was actually a good example of the psychedelic material that I'd have to do before I was able to start performing to psychedelic crowds themselves. Because I just had a joke about doing too many mushrooms and walking into a Best Buy and which is an electronics store, and seeing walking into the camcorder department and seeing on the TV what I thought was a movie about me watching a movie about myself. And so, that's like a silly, hey, what happens if your mind is altered and you walked into a camcorder department? That's the kind of silly joke. And it was a funny enough joke and everything, but that's like a very good example of the kind of humor that I would have to do in a comedy club. If I even wanted to mention mushrooms, I would need to kind of couch it in such like silly and goofiness and absurdity, that's the only way that it was palatable for the public. And it's actually kind of like a metaphor of, this is kind of what psychedelic researchers are having to do with the FDA. They're kind of having to really figure out how exactly they present like, okay, so I want to tell people about mushrooms, but how do you get people to hear you
Hmm.
talk about mushrooms? How do
Uh-huh.
you come to where they are a little bit? And within that, you need to like figure out a few tricks. You need to make some compromises, and so that's still where we're at in the U.S. in terms of psychedelics. And my fear is that we're going to be like this for a long time. My hope is that because of what's happened with marijuana, although I don't think it was done in the best way, but opening up some of the boundaries in at least with states' rights for marijuana, and now the decriminalization of mushrooms in certain cities, that doesn't make them legal. Decriminalized just means they're a lower priority for law enforcement. But it's a step in the right direction. My hope is that maybe one of the nice things that comes out of a pandemic is that everyone has to reprioritize things. And when hospitals are overrun and we're out of resources, maybe we stop writing checks to the Drug Enforcement Agency. Maybe we realize that this outrageous war on drugs that does so much more harm than good, and is really having a negative impact on the world as a whole, but especially in the U.S., which is like we're kind of the ones that are the major players on the war on drugs and kind of kicked out this whole thing off. If in having to reprioritize things, we simply don't have the money for the war on drugs anymore, and decide to save that however many billions or $1 trillion or whatever, and put that into healthcare, and then healthcare is, um, has somewhat, I don't know if I want to say looser standards, but reprioritizing, and like maybe we don't need to show the same level of caution in things that have already tested well and shown a lot of benefits for people. We're now going into a world that if we come out of this okay, um, nearly every single person on Earth is going to have post-traumatic stress disorder in one way or another. And if MDMA in America has shown the most promise for post-traumatic stress disorder, then maybe it, as we're rushing to scramble to figure out what to do about this, about all of the mental health issues that are going to start becoming very, very clear very soon, maybe that will loosen up some of the regulatory process, and and the government might even start putting money into this research, rather than these organizations having to raise all of the money themselves. And I think it will be some time to go from MDMA to something like ayahuasca, but um, it also, once one state made marijuana medically legal, a whole lot of other states came right afterwards, and then recreation came for a lot of states right afterwards, and somehow it's still federally illegal. But I think that will fall soon, and so so change can, in certain circumstances, happen really quickly, and I hope that uh, one of the good things that comes out of this is in the world of psychedelic research and psychedelic therapy.
Before you start, you get where you are in this moment, and you start getting with the psychedelics. How you relate, how you, in this way, you were thinking how to make proud my parents with the with great jokes. How you interact these drugs, also these psychedelics, with your parents? No, how you integrate this with your family, with your neighbors, or so
Oh,
with the
I
people?
first off, I just don't. The stigma is so deep that people, like my slightly more conservative family, they don't want to hear it. There's not, this is the other big thing, um, holding psychedelic research up, is that the average person in the United States, especially in a place, especially in rural areas, especially in places like in the Midwest or in the South, Midwest where I'm at right now, the middle of the country in the South, mental health is just not a priority for anybody. Wellness is still not a priority. A lot of people still think like meditation and yoga are like really weird things, and and so talks about depression, or anxiety. A lot of times there's still like the pull up your bootstraps kind of attitude, and you just don't talk about it and you don't complain about it. You got to just be tough. And so there's still a lot of that existing out there. And so, you can tell someone like, hey, this is good for PTSD, this is good for depression, this is good for creativity. Well, you just listed a whole bunch of things that no one really cares that much about, unfortunately. Whereas if it were the case that there was maybe some secondary data in some of this research that showed like just a glimmer of a chance that psychedelics could make for better erections, I think that psychedelics would be I think they would be legal tomorrow, worldwide, because
Really?
that's where people's priority is right now.
Uh-huh.
And
Wow.
I joke, and it's funny, but it's also
Yeah.
funny because it's true, and
Uh-huh.
it's also sad because it's
Yes.
it's true. But I promise you, if any of these if any of these studies were also logging, people's family relationships, income, work relationships, and sexual drive and things like that within there. What they would find is that it actually does improve your if if you help treat someone's PTSD or depression, they're going to they're going to have less sexual dysfunction as well. And so, but you don't tell anyone the mechanism for that. If you can just make the headline "Psychedelics make dicks harder," then that changes the world. And then you just need to get whatever sports player or famous basketball player or whatever to do some commercial about how they did mushrooms or ayahuasca, and now they have their better erections than ever. And I promise you, every single person is going to be like, we need to get these psychedelics immediately. And then of course they'll have the experience. They'll feel a little foolish for why they why they did that in the first place. But then we'll at least all be a little closer to being a little more mindful and tuned in. So
But
I think honestly that I think that we are going to need to honestly figure out ways of tricking and manipulating people into being more accepting of these. And so I don't think that kind of ridiculous example is that far off from the kind of clever sort of um, marketing that the psychedelic community is going to have to do.
just for the record, in this joke that you said, it is true.
I know.
Ayahuasca, it helps you to have better erections.
Of course it does.
Yeah.
It's because it's any mindfulness practice would. It's the stress
Yes.
the stress response system's job is to mobilize energy away from unnecessary things, and it's built for running away from a lion. And so if you're running from a lion, your body needs to shut off everything unnecessary. It needs to shut off it needs to shut off your digestive system. It needs to shut off parts of your immune system, and it needs to shut off your sex drive, because this is no time for an erection if you're running from a lion. And so the parasympathetic response system is what brings everything back online. This is why you need to be somewhat relaxed to have a good erection in the first place. And so any mindfulness practice on earth is going to give you a better erection. But don't tell people that. Don't tell people the mechanisms. Just say ayahuasca gives you a better erection. And most people, that's all they need to hear. You you
Yeah.
you could you could even try to warn people and be like, well, just so you know, there's speculation that maybe there's some mental health issues, and so people will be like, I don't care, I'm going to go crazy if I don't get better erections.
Yes.
I mean, it's the truth of the world that we live in, and it's just a part of the human condition. So, and you and I, we're also talking from a pretty privileged perspective, where we've gotten to have these experiences. There's a parallel universe that
Yeah.
that where we didn't get to have these experiences, and maybe either one of us would be would be working with the DEA right now. Maybe either. I don't think that'd be the case. But maybe either of us would have the same stigma that we're fighting against right now. There are a lot of there are a lot of things out there of you, you know people people see a shark attack on the news, and they never want to get in the ocean again. Mind you, people have a much greater chance of just drowning anywhere than they do getting eaten by a shark in the ocean. They have a much greater chance of dying on the drive to get to the ocean than they do getting eaten by a shark. But this is like a really salient thing, and it's different. It's an anomaly, and so our brains attach to this more. This is why the news is scaring people. um, uh, people really attach to this so much. They want to know what the threats are out there, and there's this negativity bias where our ancestors needed to be. If there's a rustling in the brush, we yeah, most of the time it was just the wind, but if it did happen to be a lion, you needed to be aware of that. So we have these kind of better safe than sorry alarms going off in our heads, and then there's confirmation bias. So then we have this feeling that the world's this very scary place, which right now it is. But we have this feeling even when everything's just fine. We're
Uh-huh.
sweating about our 401k or whatever, and so then we look to validate that internal feeling that we have, and we turn to the news, and the news is driven based on ratings more than accuracy. And so you take something like a picture of grocery store shelves being empty, and that's just more interesting than showing all of the pictures of all the grocery store shelves that aren't empty. And so then you see that you have the internal mindset that you're not even aware of, that wants to validate your internal fears, your alarms, saying that the world's this very scary place. You turn on the news, you see exactly what you thought you would, which is this very scary situation, which is a false representation of reality. And 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 the same thing happens with psychedelics, where most people heard some story of like, well, I knew this guy in college that like jumped out a window or something. No, they don't. They didn't know anyone that jumped out a window on psychedelics, but they like heard a story about that. And then we have these kind of we our memory isn't the best either, and it's really easy to be influenced. You can uh, in studies they've figured out how to test how to prime adults into believing that they had a trip to Disneyland as a kid, even though they were never there, and remember going to Disneyland. And the same thing is kind of happens with the public perception of psychedelics, and people that are old enough um, to remember like the hysteria of the 60s of like trying to the news finding like one clip of someone like looking crazy and showing that as a representation of what the common psychedelic experience is like. And that's to this day where most people are getting their information from, or people in college did have a psychedelic experience in the worst condition possible, the wrong set and setting, like I did a number of times. Fortunately, it wasn't enough to deter me, but I've done psychedelics in all of the worst sets and settings, and that's the common. Most people think of them as like any other drug, like you alcohol or coke or even marijuana in like this um, keg party kind of situation, but but the psychedelic experience, that that is the absolute worst set and setting that you could be in to have a psychedelic experience. Not
Uh-huh.
only that, but you're in college, you're at the most confused part of your life,
Uh-huh.
and psychedelics are a window into your own inner world, which at that time is confusion, because you're a confused person. And so you're
Yes.
having a much more confusing experience than
Uh-huh.
you normally would, because psychedelics are these kind of non-specific amplifiers, and they just
Uh-huh.
kind of amplify whatever's going on in there. And
Mm.
so then people then make the mistake of blaming that experience on the substance, rather than all of the uh, all of the other variables. And they did it once, and they did it with poor guidance. And so that's another large subset of the population. That's where they have their information of the psychedelic experience from.
holy truth.
Hmm.
The holy truth. They say my grandma will say to you, your mouth is full of truth.
Ah.
Yeah,
I like your grandma.
yeah. I have a an episode with my grandma also. She's my first master, but it's in Spanish. Maybe when you learn Spanish, you can listen.
I do need to learn Spanish.
It's a life is
You're right
life
about
is a
that.
ride.
It sure
Yeah,
is.
you will be you yeah you will have a lot of community also in Spanish. They will love your jokes, and
Yeah.
for sure, I'll tell you as a South American person, your jokes are very good.
Oh, thank you.
Your humor is very sharp, and it's very sharp. You
Thank
make
you.
fun of people, and people take times to discover that you're making fun of people. It's very good. It's very good. Okay, have some few questions left.
Sure.
How we going with time? Are you okay with time?
Um, I have I have like 20 minutes or so tops.
Okay. Okay. No, but we have talked pretty much everything what I want to ask you. Just a few things that I want to share with people from your experience as a researcher in this world of psychedelics. More of psychedelics. I see you that you like to find answers. Yeah, you
Hmm.
like to understand things, why things happen like it happen. So, what is? Do you feel that? Do you think it is or was what was your biggest obstacle or challenge that has been presented to you in the move towards this research of finding the true in your heart, finding the true what's going outside, understanding the reality? Yeah.
Well, the biggest obstacle is still, I guess, just the public perception that we've been talking about. So just for my personal life, one of the things that is so you know, a lot of these researchers have a harder time than I do, so I don't want to make it sound like I'm complaining, but just if people want to know some insight into what it's like trying to communicate psychedelics to the public from a comedian's perspective, I have run into barrier after barrier. You know, I put together this really successful tour, and 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 I have um, you know, I had sold out. It was like a 111 city tour. It was sold out shows. I went and I did these independent um, like music rooms and stuff. So I was like outside of the mainstream comedy club. And because of the success of the tour, the first assumption that I made was that this is going to be really easy for me to have a special made about this on, say, like Netflix or HBO or something like that. I've had a special on Netflix before. I've had an hour special on Netflix. I had a half hour special on Comedy Central. And this was so much better than any of my work in the past. And this is the first time I'd ever like just completely sold out a tour. So I thought it was going to be a no-brainer from them. It was not. It was met with the same kind of stigma and judgment um, that we've been talking about. And so that was like one example, and I was like, well, you know, maybe I'm just not a big enough name yet, and that's why I'm having such a difficult time with this. Then I was brought in on a Comedy Central show. I was brought in as a writer. They were doing a specific psychedelic episode on a show called Problematic with Moshe Kasher. And again, it wasn't the most highly rated show, and so maybe if it would have been like South Park or a more popular show, this would have been easier. But I was brought in as a writer and a consultant, and I got like Rick Doblin with the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies to come in and be a guest on the show, and I was giving them other people that they could talk to, and um and the standards and practice people, the kind of censorship people. This is for Comedy Central, and Comedy Central is, so there's like basic network cable in the US, and that has like pretty high standards in terms of, you know, we don't want to say any naughty words or anything like that on network television because
Yeah.
the kids might hear. Well,
Mm.
cable is much looser, and then Comedy Central is kind of or historically had been known as this edgy, like boundary pushing. You know, they have like South Park and The Daily Show and things like that that are like really pushing the boundaries of like what content can we show on TV. And even they were like, oh well, you guys are just saying only the good things about psychedelics. What about all the brain damage from MDMA and stuff like that? And we'd be like, well, there isn't brain damage. And then they'd be like, but you got to talk about the brain damage. And then we'd be like, well, so you want us to make things up? And so then we had to do all of these things. Like we had to find some person. We basically had to, like, rather than getting networks, we had to like get some nervous mom on there to be like, well, I don't want my kid doing psychedelics, just to show like a different point of view. There was like, we were going to shoot a fun sketch where I was going to be like a psychedelic sommelier. So I was going to have a table with all the different psychedelics and kind of explain what they do. And then and they were like, no, you can't show the drugs, and or you can't have the actual drugs. So then we had the art department make fake drugs that would look like it. And then they're like, no, it looks too real, we can't show that. So then finally we were like, can we show pictures of the drugs? They wouldn't let us show pictures of
Wow.
these substances. These are just like few small examples of, and this is just one thing. And then they ended up not even airing that episode after it was already butchered, after it already just became like a joke of like making fun of hippies. They still wouldn't air that. It's available. It was eventually available online, but then um, I have I have um uh, um let's see. um I oh this is a big company, Universal Studios, which is like, it couldn't be any bigger, reached out to me. Someone there reached out to me, wanted me to host a psychedelic story telling show that they created. It was their idea, and they came to me. So this wasn't me like trying to pitch something. And then they couldn't do it in house, so they tried to pitch it outside of it. And I'm talking Showtime, HBO, Netflix, every single person. They were hungry for drug content. What they wanted was more like sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of stuff. They wanted like Narcos, like drug deal, they wanted the Breaking Bads. They wanted basically this like after school special of like the drug war stuff, or someone using drugs and like having an addiction problem and like uh, being a degenerate or whatever. Those are the sorts of stories that they were used to airing. And so when we showed them a psychedelic positive show, and I'm talking like we shot a pilot that was just like someone sharing a fun story about doing mushrooms, and having that experience reinvigorate their sense of spirituality that they had lost in their adult life. And it was a fun story, and they were like, are you crazy? We can't air that. I'm talking about HBO and Showtime. These people have no standards or practice. There's no one telling them what they can and cannot air. They're just like, as like not wanting to like get sued or something by telling people that mindfulness practices might be able to benefit you, and these substances might be able to aid in mindfulness practices. And that's where we are right now. And this is a few years ago, and things have come along a lot. You know, Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, has been changing a lot of people's minds, and it's been a bestseller, and it's been on the front of every bookstore, and that's incredible. But and people are starting to like wake up and be a little more open-minded, but that's the kind of stigma and resistance that anyone that wants to explore these topics is going to be running into.
Wow, it's wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
It's amazing, no? Mm. eh, so to finish,
Yeah.
first I want. So how? So now that you are in this position, what's gonna happen? What is the next step now in TV, in shows? O sea, uh, when this is going to be allowed, or what is the path? What is the path that you can see? No, maybe it can be another path, but what you can see now in this moment where you are with experience you have, the connections you have, how this can be possible to be delivered in the beautiful way for so people in the mass media programs, no, like Netflix or Amazon. I found you, for example, in Prime, Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
Eh,
But
so
that's not, you know, that's we did that ourselves. Amazon allows anyone with a legitimate production to put it on their site. So that wasn't like that wasn't like an Amazon original or something like that. They would have never spent the money to produce anything like that, like psychedelic related, at least at the time that things were then. So it's nice that there's platforms. You know, anyone, you can put your stuff on YouTube. You know, YouTube's not going to stop you from doing much of anything. But that's pretty much our most of our only option right now is kind of these social platforms. But I also think that
but
you know, some of the yeah.
how many
Hello.
years you believe, how many years you believe have to go, so to pass in order this to be more open and released for everybody?
Well, again, in terms of how we're framing this, you know, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies does a nice job of focusing on PTSD, getting the worst of the worst cases of, you know, these are veterans, these are victims of sexual abuse, and so this is like no one in the public is going to argue with that someone that's tried everything under the sun, and that, you know, a troop that fought for our country that is struggling, you know, no one's going to keep them from doing that. And so that's like a useful tool, is focusing on things like that first, and then as that becomes legitimized, hopefully then it will bleed into, like, not only can you use psychedelics to say treat your depression or PTSD, but a perfectly healthy person can use a psychedelic to help learn about themselves, optimize their life, to have a spiritual experience, to have fun, to have some laughs, to be creative. These are all
Yes.
these are all a huge
Hmm.
part of what makes life worth living. If you take away someone's depression and PTSD, what do you want? Someone to just like neutral? They're still not enjoying life. You still need to show people how to enjoy life.
Hmm. Hmm.
Not maybe not all the time, um, but they need to get some enjoyment. They need to get something to live for. Otherwise, just not having PTSD, that's just not enough for anybody. Then now you're just you know, um, now you're just an automaton, um, going through life waiting to die, you know, and and that's also not terribly protective against future mental health events.
Yes. For example, I use the medicine for couple. I do couple retreats, and I give them ayahuasca and San Pedro, and works like amazingly.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
believe
they
it.
really grow, and also for finding purpose,
Mm,
like you say, no creativity. Also, for business, also you can know how to communicate and create better relationship with your coworkers. No, it's
mm,
amazing. So it's about connection.
mm.
Thank you very much for accepting
Yeah,
this invitation. It has been a pleasure to talk with you. I can talk with you for more time, but I know. Thank you for giving all this time for us, and maybe we can also have maybe another episode later,
yeah, I
if
would
it's
love that.
possible.
That sounds great.
And remember that you're invited to our home. I will
I
send
can't wait.
you I will send you more details about us, and so you can have the communication, and you can later, when you can, we can have an agenda. And you're welcome, so you can have your raw ayahuasca for the first time, and it's going to be an honor
Mm.
to take you out your virginity with raw ayahuasca.
I can't wait. Raw ayahuasca. I'm very excited.
Yes, I say to people, imagine you have all the beauty without all the struggle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
It's
Amazing.
amazing. Yeah.
Uh,
So
well, I can't wait. Thank you so much for having me.
thank you for your time.